Welcome to the Innovative Leader Podcast, featuring Christy Geiger, Executive Coach with Synergy Strategies, and David Phillips, Professor, Consultant, and Coach. All right, so welcome to the new episode, next episode of the Innovative Leader. Today we're going to talk about infinite versus finite games and 2.0 versus, or 4.0 versus 2.0 leadership, how they kind of parallel each other, and how COVID may have accelerated this transition from 2.0 to 4.0, from finite to infinite. And so we're gonna talk about a little bit about kind of go over a review of 4.0 versus 2.0. We'll talk infinite versus finite, and then we will talk about how to get to that, or some opportunities to get to that infinite mindset, or that 4.0 mindset. And so Christy joins me again, all the way from Georgetown, Texas. And so Christy, I hope you're well. And so let's talk about, let's do a quick review of 2.0 versus 4.0. Why don't you start us out with that, and then we'll build on that.
Reviewing 2 and 4?
Yep.
Okay, so when we talk about 2 and 4.0, again, that kind of came out of the Silicon Valley. We look at technology and how technology has organically morphed from initially where we think about the library in the 1.0 world. My mom would take me to the library and we'd check out books, and if the library was closed, oh no, we can't get the book that we need. The internet comes along. And first, the computer, my dad had a Radio Shack, whatever, right. We started there. The internet comes along and I'm doing my project. I need some information. Library's closed. No problem. I can go online and get information even after hours. It becomes a two-way street per se.
Right.
Another way I like to talk about 2.0 is a little bit more like a car on a road. It's a two-way street. I can go north, south, east, and west. I've got my vehicle and I can go. As we move into 4.0 is, I like to think about 4.0 more like an airplane. And pilots will tell you that there are roads in the sky, but you can't see them. And so you don't just get in an airplane and drive on the road. Right. It's about coordinates and understanding the coordinates, but it's very dynamic. It's very flexible. It's very nimble. So if I'm driving down the road and I run into a roadblock, I have to stop, sit, and wait. Right. I need to understand a different way to navigate. I can't just off-road it in general. Versus, so same thing in our world, and really the 1900, this last era that we're coming out of, it was a great era of production and efficiency and process improvement. And it was very much hierarchical, top-down leadership, sure. Because you worked your way up the ladder. You grew sage wisdom of how to lead and how to be an expert in an area of work. And as you did that, then you would teach and raise up other leaders. And your job as a leader was to know that well, and then to share that wisdom and bring other people up.
Right.
And so it was very much a top-down leadership style. 4.0 is really what we've been shifting to in the last 10 years, really. We see a lot of the 4.0 mindsets of being very nimble, organic, more multidimensional, more flexible. We see a lot of those values and attributes and characteristics embodied in the millennial era. A lot of times we think those are just millennials, but it's really a way that our entire world culture has adapted with technology. And the 4.0, technology is like our phone. You can do something on your computer, and then you can go get that on your phone, or you can get that on, someone else's computer because of cloud. So that's how 4.0 technology becomes more nimble and more multifaceted. So going back to business, really right now, what I thought 2020 was going to be about was shifting into this 4.0 kind of leadership, and that the more millennials that are in the workforce, which we know tip over 50% now, that the more that millennials are in the workforce and that culture is very predominant, that businesses are forced to think in a 4.0 way. And when a business thinks in a 4.0 way, that is about being more flexible, more nimble, not here's the rule, this is what you do. It's the 3.0 flat organization, but it is leadership from the bottom, that you're not here to be the God teller of everything,
Right.
but you're lifting up that followership and you're saying, what do you think? And what's important to you? And a leader's job is more to be a coach and a facilitator of your team's wisdom. And your skill set is really to be this collaborator and this holder of a larger vision and a larger direction, and to lift your team up rather than to tell your team what to do.
Right.
Telling is 2.0, lifting up is 4.0. So there's a way that we've shifted into this finite, infinite, or I'm sorry, we'll talk about that next, but from the 2.0, 4.0 is this area that you and I, David, love to talk about because it's very relevant to leadership. And we are all in the process. I understand 4.0 and I'm still learning about 4.0 and what it looks like. What does it mean to you, David, as you look at 2 and 4? How do you see and define those two spectrums?
Yeah, so 2 is, I agree with you. 2 is 2 is efficiency based. There's a lot of process that arose out of that. There is a structure and somewhat of a hierarchy that arose out of that. 4, which is kind of really what has been going through my mind for, I don't know, 15, 20 years. In fact, it is more about team oriented. Everybody has a voice. Everybody has a say, and that small changes, tweaks even, can bring overwhelming change within an organization. And it doesn't have to happen at the top. It can happen at any level of the organization. And that if organizations are oriented that way, then interacting with their teams that way, then a small tweak can truly make that huge change. Leaders become coaches, leaders become facilitators, like you shared, and that as long as is kind of the core of who you are, that identity of who you are, it exists, then when, as you interact with the culture, as you interact with your stakeholders, the business can transition. The business is flexible enough to adapt and change, and still have that kind of that core or identity that exists. And so the organization can grow and develop through and weather any storm, as opposed to being more task oriented, which would be 2.0, more and in doing that, kind of having a scaled down view of who you are, of your identity, of what you do. My go-to is back in the 70s, and records, vinyl was huge, and I had vinyl all over the place, even in the early 80s. Then cassettes came along, and those became huge, and then CDs came along, and then obviously we're at digital levels now, and in some ways we're back to vinyl too. But so many vinyl companies went out of business because they saw themselves as a record company as opposed to a media distribution company that could adjust regardless of what form of media was available to publish. So my goal has always been to get leadership to think of a bigger purpose, more 4.0, as opposed to being more transactional, more task oriented, more limited in scope, and in doing that, being able to build organizations that can weather changes and adaptations that happen, just like COVID has done. And you see businesses that have been able to do that, and you see businesses that haven't, and some of that is scale, and some of that is mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah. So when we talk about 4 and 2, 2.0 leadership, flexibility, coaching, those are big pieces of 4.0. Task oriented, knowledge restricted. Those are our 2.0 mindsets. And so when we start to think about how we make decisions in stressful times like that is going on, how we begin to plan for the future in this kind of framework, that 4.0, that migration to 4.0 really has to happen, and it's been pushed to happen quickly because of COVID and because of all the adjustments we're having to make within the marketplace.
Yeah, good. You brought up a topic just a little bit ago about that you were talking in your answer around change. And I think that's a great place to go back and highlight, because really in the era of 2.0, and I want to be clear too, like sometimes we can sound like it's negative. We're not saying that 2.0 is bad. It's like, oh, high school is bad, and now I'm in college. Oh, those eager little high schoolers. It is not minimizing or saying that 2.0 is bad. It's recognizing that there are different stages, different seasons, different
their evolution
operating.
Yeah, so it's an evolution. So we couldn't be at 4.0 without the 2.0 emphasis on processes and systems.
Correct.
And efficiencies.
Absolutely. And another piece that you were starting to go to with change is that really the speed. And that in the 2.0, we were still doing faxes, we were doing snail mail, we were doing phone calls, you paid for long distance minutes. Cell phones weren't even really the way they are today. The cloud was not how it is today. All of that is what really leads us into 4.0, because the speed is so much faster. Why is this speed faster? Technology makes us faster. So when you have to wait and I'm like, hey, David, I sent you a document. I'm going to fax it over. I'll get that to you by tomorrow. It's going to take time, versus right now, I could pull up on my phone and snap it over to you 4 different ways. It's not a big deal. So the flexibility and the dynamic ability to be very fast with our information and exchanging information is part of what really precipitates the 4.0 change. And because we're so fast, on one hand, it can blow your brain and you're like, oh, I can't keep up. But that's why we have to stop being so finite. When we're so finite and rigid and rule-based, it's almost like if you're trying to drive that airplane on a road. The airplane isn't meant to drive on the road. So if you need to have the nimbleness and the dynamicness, then either you're in the car or you're in the airplane, because the car goes on the road, the airplane goes in the sky. And sometimes we want to be 4.0 leaders in the airplane, but we want to drive on the road because we like the safety and the security and the knowingness of the 2.0 road. And we've got to learn the coordinates of how to operate in the 4.0 world, or in the 4.0 way and world, which to me, that's kind of where it tips to this finite infinite game. So Simon Sinek wrote the Infinite Game book that came out last fall, which is fantastic. He's been talking about it for several years. You can Google and get a lot of his, I believe, I don't know if he did a TED Talk on that, but he has he did do a TED Talk on it.
TED Talk,
he has many of his trainings out there where he's talking about the finite and the infinite game. And I have a theory that it parallels our 2.0 and 4.0. Now, Simon does not say this. This is my application as I'm noticing what's happening in the world with business owners. And going back to what you were saying about focusing on the bigger purpose and picture, and it affects the way that we plan and it affects the way that we make decisions. Because what I'm noticing for leaders, myself, for others, business owners, and just people in general, there's a way that when we are in a finite mindset, we become more exhausted easily, become more frustrated because we've done planning and then the game changes and we have to plan again. We do communication and then something changes and we have to communicate again. We feel a loss of, it feels like it doesn't matter. I did all this work and now it doesn't matter. So we lose motivation.
Right.
We lose our energy to do these things because we are feeling fatigued by the volume of decisions and planning that needs to happen. But the theory is that we want to invite you guys as our listeners to try on is, are we thinking as leaders more finite or infinite?
Yep.
And when we are thinking more finite, it's possible that that parallels very much with the 2.0 rules and structure that we know. We know what's happening. But the infinite game, if you're flying in a helicopter and suddenly, I'm sorry, not a helicopter, in an airplane, and suddenly a storm rolls in, that pilot has the ability to instantly read it, their board, and then readjust. And that's what we have to do as leaders today, is to be able to read the climate outside of us and then adjust dynamically,
Right.
versus setting the course and being limited in our ability to adjust. How do you see that, David, the 2 and the 4 paralleling to infinite and finite?
Yeah. So it's crazy how they do parallel. When you, and of course, this is not a book report on Simon's book, but just, real quick, Simon says that essentially there are 5 things you need to have an infinite mindset. One is a just cause or a higher purpose, trusting teams, a capacity for existential flexibility, and the courage to lead for the long game, which is don't expect results immediately, like going to the gym. Success doesn't happen overnight. So you have to play the long game. And then he also talks about a worthy rival, someone who can challenge you at your level. And so when you just hear those 5 characteristics, or those 5 things, it really is all about 4.0 leadership. It is about trusting your teams to make decisions, to do the jobs, and to lead and be a facilitator of those teams. It is about a higher purpose, to not thinking of yourself and your role transactionally, or with a small mind, but to think of it in a bigger framework, with a bigger picture in mind. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. To be able to be flexible. One of the things that people struggle with is we have to embrace mystery. We have to embrace the unknown. If we can't embrace the unknown, then we're always going to be finite, I think. And that's a strong statement, I know. But if we can't embrace the need to have options and plans and be completely flexible in what we do, then essentially all we're doing is we're planning transactional ideas, transactional actions. We're planning for a known instead of an unknown. And so I think we have to really embrace that mystery, that we don't know what's coming. We can stick our finger up, we can check the culture, we can see what we see, and we can head down that road, but always with the understanding that we need to be able to adjust at any time. And when you build your purpose at a level, then you're able to make that adjustment. And so to me, that's 4.0. It's true 4.0. And then, the courage to lead for the long term. It's not about this quarter's results. It's about how things are going to be impacted over the long haul. So to me, it's just a total and complete comparison. It just kind of all ties in together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think to take that and then tie that back a little bit more to COVID, and why is COVID accelerating this? Why is COVID accelerating both 4.0 and this infinite game? Is what I'm noticing with leaders, and again, myself and whatever, we're trying to make these decisions, but the rules keep changing. Right now, we're at the top of July. Texas, where I'm at, had opened. Mostly we're up to 75% open. Yesterday, the governor announced mandatory mask, reducing back to gatherings of not more than 10, those types of things, right? So
Right.
as different variables happen with different information, yes, everybody has their different opinions and thoughts about the information, but the reality is there is unknown. I love what you said about embracing the mystery of the unknown. And you really can't do that in the finite game.
Right.
The finite game, you are reliant on the ability to know the variables and the factors so that you can be more productive.
Right.
You were talking earlier about identity, and I don't know what you would say about this, but I was like, well, what is that identity? And to me, it's almost like 2.0 is an identity based on performance versus 4.0 is an identity based on nimbleness, your ability to be dynamic. And so when we were winning and survive, or not just surviving, we were winning and really on top of our game at 2.0, we were highly productive. Our performance was off the charts. But in 4.0, it's not that we don't want to have performance or that we don't want to be productive, but there becomes a new measurement of really what success looks like.
Right.
And success looks like the ability to be dynamic, the ability to be nimble. But you get that, like you were saying, by knowing what is the ultimate game. So I know we have to, this just takes a while to define. It is on one hand complex and on one hand simple, but maybe a newer concept that we're putting these pieces together for all of us right now in this era, because it's self-defining in this time. So when we think about how can leaders shift more to that 4.0 and shift to, what is it that they need to shift? How do they tell if they're in finite thinking? How do they shift into infinite thinking? What are some questions or ways that they can be monitoring that and adapting?
So some of the things that we can begin to shift, some of the questions we can ask are, how am I leading? Am I making the decisions, or am I empowering my team to make decisions? I think that's a big one, because when we hit 2.0 and crisis hit, it is this tendency to, I'm the boss, I'm going to make the decision, you guys do what I tell you to do. So that to me, that's an indicator of how we're leading. Who is making the decisions, and how am I empowering my team to do that?
That's really good. I just want to jump on that really quick, because from the podcast that we did back on the scarf, what happens when we are top-down decision makers is we instantly activate that limbic scarf mode, where people feel a lack of autonomy, they feel a lack of freedom to make their own, they feel a lower relegated status. So all kinds of things trigger and then leave your people not at their highest level of performance.
Right. Yeah.
So, great. Okay. What else?
Yeah. So, and then the other one that I think is a big one is what are you planning for? So you were given a great example of your friend Amy. She's a teacher, right? And so she's based on what you said, she's an elementary teacher, and so she's trying to develop a learning center for reading. Well, and now the game has changed, right? So Texas is closed. We don't know. She doesn't know what that's going to look like in the fall. My wife is a teacher. I work with schools. Everybody's trying to figure that out right now. And so in trying to plan a learning center, in essence, you're in this is not to, it's 2.0. It's just reality. In trying to develop that learning center, that's a transactional piece. That's a framework piece. The like you said, when we were talking earlier, the big picture is, I'm trying to inspire people to read, kids to read. And so that's the higher purpose. And so if you take that as the framework, then you begin to explore different options. Gamification, there's all kinds of web tools that could be used. I think about, we think about restaurants. Restaurants, at least here in the Atlanta area, restaurants had opened up. every other table, they were about half maximum capacity. We were ready in around the 4th of July to go to concert venues opening up. And now that has slowed things like that. But now you have restaurants who are were planning for all of these people to be back in. Having now what are we going to do? So the question becomes, how can the goal is to deliver good quality food to people. That's the goal. It is not in good quality food in our building. And so then the question becomes, how do we make it more accessible? And that's, now we look at the rise of Grubhub and Postmates and all of these delivery services that have evolved, and even restaurants. We ordered from Outback a couple months ago, and Outback delivered. The way they were using their servers now were as delivery people, which I thought was a genius idea, because they get to keep their job, those kinds of things. So it really becomes, how are you looking at how are you making decisions, and how are you planning? Are you planning for something small, or something that is inflexible, or are you planning in a flexible way that kind of gives you different options, looking at things at a higher purpose? So that's if you have that mindset, and ask those questions, then you're on your way to 4.0.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I like that. So how are you making decisions? How are you planning? Is it flexible or inflexible? What are the different options?
Right.
So with that infinite part, really, if leaders are looking back at what is my bigger picture, and I think the reading example is good. I'm trying to inspire kids by having a motivational reading center. There's lots of people who that applies to. We have libraries, right, museums. Our world was very much, even there's a article by Starbucks recently. Starbucks' whole mission was really about part of being a gathering place, yep, and people coming to the coffee shop. They have completely, and I know this word gets overused right now, but they've completely pivoted from this in-person coffee shop to their drive-through model and whatnot. And I haven't studied it enough to speak as an expert on that. If somebody knows, go ahead and put the Starbucks story in the comments. But they have shifted, where we were in an era that it was really about connection and sociability, but being that eyeball to eyeball, that relational kind of model, which is great. That's still important. Nobody's throwing that out.
Right.
However, we need to find new ways to do that. And so then we have to go back and ask that question, what is the bigger picture? What is the higher purpose? Why am I doing this? So for Amy, she's doing it to inspire kids to read and
right,
to be excited about reading. Okay, great. You know what? It's probably not going to be in that physical learning center, as
right,
cute as it was and as much as they enjoyed it. We have to rise up into that airplane and find other ways to adapt, because as far as we can tell, that change, the speed of change is continuing to speed up,
right,
and the variability of change is also continuing to go in that route. And so if we try to make it finite, if we try to go, well, I'm just going to see if I can get into my classroom and see what it looks like. Well, I'm just going to see what they say. Let's just plan for this month, and then next month, maybe we can go back to the way it was. No, you are playing a finite game and
right,
really setting yourself up for frustration, because when it changes in a way that you didn't expect, it's not about anticipating the way things are changing. It's about creating a way that is naturally dynamic and flexible.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about technology companies. So what has happened in the last couple of weeks? Facebook has announced group video chats. You can create your own room now in Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Google came out with Google Duo, which I honestly had not heard of until it happened upon a crossword app that I play every day, and it was talking about Google's Duo. And so that was the part of the clue. It's a video chatting app, and it essentially is. We talk about FaceTiming. It was Google's attempt to create FaceTime for any mobile operating system. Excuse me. You see WebEx trying to reinvent itself. And then obviously Zoom has zoomed to the top. And so you have all of these tech companies now trying to get into the social connecting business. And because we are so distributed at this point. So so you see even those tech companies that are they're pivoting, making shifts, and building applications to achieve things. And so they see that as a higher purpose of bringing people together. Google is doing that. Facebook has been trying to do that, for several years, decades. And you see other companies, jumping on that bandwagon because they see the need. So there was a need. We got to meet that need. And that's part of our DNA. It's part of our identity. So,
yeah, I'm gonna have to wrap up.
Yep.
I have swimmers today, and they're driving. So, yeah, but no, there is. I think that's interesting what you were just saying, because I think it's actually in the heart of innovation. Because when you're looking at that question, what is the need? And then, okay, sorry. So what is the need? And then what is our greatest purpose? You're looking forward. Your mindset is ahead.
Yep.
So then you're able to innovate towards that purpose and that need, versus when we experience that phenomena of chasing, that we're chasing something. I think that's because sometimes our mindset is like, oh, we're trying to anticipate where the cheese is moving to and how the game is changing and
Yep.
how we can keep up with it. And so when we experience feeling behind and feeling like we're trying to get ahead of the curve, it's often because we're watching more what other people are doing, which isn't
Right.
bad. It's great to see what thought leaders are doing.
Yep.
But if we're more focused on what other people are doing and trying to catch them, versus being inwardly reflective of what is my greatest purpose? What am I really bringing to the world? And what does the world need? What is the problem that's happening, or the opportunity that I am bringing this gift to the world to solve, to help, to support, to uplift? As I'm thinking about that, I'm focused on my game, and I'm able to innovate and meet where the innovation needs to happen,
Right.
rather than just chasing things.
No, absolutely. And that could actually be, part of that could be where Senec's worthy rival is. You might see somebody doing something and you think, I can do that better, or I can do a different spin on it. And now you're innovating against someone who is innovating, and that rivalry, spurns up, and now you're in a game. Who's gonna, so exactly. No, I agree with that completely.
Yeah. And it becomes fun instead of
Right.
stress, right? The phenomena that happen in finite, like, this isn't just about change and the infinite and 4.0 and, oh, you're old fashioned and behind. It's not about that. It's about this crunch point that happens. We feel more stress. We feel more anxiety. We feel there are pinch points that happen when we're caught in the infinite game, when the world is changing to an infinite game. So the more things that change infinite, the more challenging it is to keep up with finite, which is why it feels like it's just going faster and faster, and I'm going to implode. That's because the car can't actually go the speed of the airplane and stay on the road. You have to evolve or transition into that airplane.
Exactly.
So, all right, I know we've got to wrap up. Yep. What's kind of a couple either highlights from today or opportunities, challenges for leaders to try on this week?
Yeah, so I think some takeaways we can note is just be cognizant of the kinds, how you're trusting your team and how you're making those decisions. Are you making the decisions for your team, or is the team part of that decision-making process, and are you trusting them? And then I think the another takeaway for me is really just being comfortable with mystery and embracing it, and not being overwhelmed by it. Because I think if you can embrace mystery, then you design and decide and develop with flexibility in mind. So those were a couple for me. How about you?
I like those. I want to dovetail on yours around being comfortable with mystery and embracing it. I think sometimes that in and of itself can be a bit mysterious. So to me, the skill set that we as leaders really are working to develop, and it really is not a friend of 2.0. In 2.0, and the word is curiosity.
Yep.
And how to be comfortable with mystery and embracing it is to become more curious.
Yes.
And which is a huge coaching skill, is curiosity, that we continue to work at, continue to build that muscle. But curiosity in 2.0 was a different kind of curiosity. And I don't quite know how to describe that, but in 2.0, there was a different kind of curiosity. The curiosity in 4.0 that we're talking about is a curiosity that doesn't have an answer. It's a curiosity that is truly wondering and is open to other people's insight and wisdom. It's not a curiosity that's almost like a lead answer or something where, I'm really curious. What do you think we'll do tomorrow?
Right.
Almost like that leading question, whatever, versus 4.0. In order for us to embrace that mystery, we have to be curious. We have to be curious about what is possible. We have to be curious about new ways to do things. We have to be curious about how will this change things in a way that brings us a gift instead of the pain. If you're kind of stuck in the pain thinking, that leads more to finite thinking, because now we have a problem to solve.
Right.
Versus curiosity is looking for the gift. What is the gift in this? What is the opportunity we have? And if you're curious about the gift and the opportunity, all of a sudden you start to see new things.
Right.
So anyway, just to dovetail off from what you were saying, I think it's great. And practicing curiosity and looking for the gift is really a great skill to develop.
Yeah. And it's curiosity that allows that you allow when you're curious in that way, you allow the curiosity to take you places you would never go.
Yes. Right.
So you go down rabbit holes, you go down trails, you go to places you would have never considered, and you let it take you there, as opposed to trying to control that curiosity even. So.
Wow. Okay. I just had a huge insight on what you were saying. Is it's why you lead under instead of over. When we're that divine expert on top, it's like, oh, I'm curious, but I'm leading. So now you're leading and navigating. Well, let's go here. Okay, team, now let's go here. So you're this knowledgeable expert, but it actually shuts down your ability to see. Yes. Versus if you do what you just said, that's really curiosity below. As a leader, you're underneath and you're going places that you don't know the answer. Right. You're like, I don't know. And the team says, well, what about this? And you go, that's interesting. What about that? And you lean into it. And then all of a sudden you have insights and connections that you never would have had because you followed below, holding the bigger picture. Leaders, don't confuse. Just because we're under doesn't mean we're aimlessly wandering in the desert. That's such a misunderstanding. You know the bigger picture of what we're ultimately trying to do, and then we can gently come underneath and we discover so many things. Yes. Thank you. That's huge for why you lead below instead of above.
Right. Absolutely. All right.
So many things. I love this topic.
Yes, me too. Okay.
All right. Well, leaders, I hope you have a great week. If you are experiencing frustration, definitely take a step back. Journaling is a super great thing to do right now to just assess, how am I maybe showing up finite? How am I operating in a finite lens versus how am I operating in that 4.0 infinite lens? What questions am I asking myself? What things am I feeling? If I'm feeling more curiosity, I'm leaning more to that 4.0 infinite. If I'm feeling frustration, exhaustion, overwhelm, and burden, I might be more on the 2.0 side. Right. And have a conversation with someone about it. Yep. Have them give you some feedback and some insight.
Absolutely. And if you want any more ideas or coaching or anything like that, just let us know. We can connect you or work with you on that as well. And so just to wrap up, feel free to try to find this wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, at our website, innovativeleader.co. You can also find this at YouTube, our Innovative Leader channel. And we'd love to answer questions that you have, or we'll always respond to comments. We'd love for you to review us on Amazon, on Apple or Google Play as well. That would really help us get our name out as well. So thanks for joining us, and I hope you have like Christy said, I hope you have a great day, great week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, Christy.
Awesome. Thanks. Have a good one.
All right, you too.